Hello students. Before we start with the demo video, I'd like to do this little slideshow kind of comparing the differences between contour drawing and then taking a look at some gesture drawings. So this first drawing here of the bicycles, kind of mechanical forms, is done entirely in contour. If you notice, there's nearly just one singular line that sort of just follows around each little bit of, you know, prescribed edge, detailed edge, and by touching each edge of the form, you get sort of a felt drawing of those bikes. It's very kind of static. You'll be able to tell the difference quite differently between this and what gesture drawings look like. Here's one of a shoe, just like what you guys did. Um, Notice how the line seems very felt. It follows along each fold and wrinkle, going in and out, really responding to every tiny little curve and undulation of the form, the textures. Here's a nice one. Notice how each one of these lines, as they go around the shell, where's my pointer? Here we go, really follows the different direction of the surface of that shell. So this is what's actually referred to as a cross contour, because each one of these lines seems to go across the surface of the form, just like longitudinal and latitudinal lines on a globe. They go across the surface, and those felt lines seem to describe the contours, just like a contour map, the shapes of the surfaces. Now, gesture drawing is quite different. In fact, if you look at this, you can see the lines are not nearly as neat. They look like they've been thrown down very quickly, and they are. Gesture drawings tend to happen incredibly rapidly. It's a way of getting your drawing out onto the page in a very, very quick manner, sort of predetermining what things are. The beauty of gesture drawing is that it tends to capture a lot of movement. Maybe it's just because of the rapidness of how the lines move. Notice like this line that just flows down this guy's leg, kind of describing each one of the folds, and then the sloppy shoe, and maybe there's not a lot of detail, but there's a lot of character. You get a feeling for what that character is doing. Here we even have like this sort of over exaggerated hump, the guy peering into his little ledger book. There's a lot of character, and you get a lot of feeling of the movement. In fact, it's used a lot in figure drawing. So oftentimes when you look up gesture drawing or Google it, it's used as a warm-up exercise in trying to determine what the figure is doing prior to drawing a more detailed drawing of that person. And notice all the lines. The lines here just look almost like tangled fishing line, just sort of mashed together into a sculpted mess. And as that mess starts to take shape, all these little wiggly light lines filling in the volumes of the form and indicating the different parts of the model. The artist then slows down and starts to add contours around the outsides of this armature. So think of it like that. You're trying to create a sculpture with your drawing. In the very first phase of that sculpture, say you take, wads of, chicken wire, and you start meshing it together, sculpting the overall shape of the form that you're trying to create. Then you start laying on the outer surfaces like the plaster or the plaster of Paris, and you add that thing to the outside, and then you start going into the fine details. A gesture drawing is like the underwire. It's the messy beginnings of the drawing that you put down quite rapidly. Oftentimes when you're drawing, you do it so quickly that mistakes happen, but rather than taking the time to sort of correct those mistakes, you just continue to go. Notice how this foot is all over the place. Either the model was sort of wiggling, or Very likely, the artist was just having a hard time trying to get it exactly in the right spot. But at the same time, that's the point. You sort of feel out your poses on your page, where with contour drawing, you're really trying to feel out the pose in your mind. You're going very, very, very slow, trying to take that information in and record it quite faithfully. With gesture drawing, you're just sketching, essentially. You're sketching this stuff out and you're letting it develop on your page. And then you go back and correct it later. You take away the parts that don't work. You clean up and you finish the parts that are working. Again, another gesture. Notice the quality difference. There's a different sort of hand in each one of these. Everybody does gesture drawings a little differently. It's one of my favorite types of drawings, to be honest, because I think it's the easiest way to start developing a style. If you think about the way you write, typically if you're writing neat, your letters look kind of, well, whatever, they look like neat letters, but as you sign your name, you start to sign your name very quickly. And everybody starts to develop a very unique looking signature. And that's partly because you get very rapid at it. You put it down very quickly and it starts to get its own style. I think gesture drawing works in the same way. One of the easiest ways to start, introducing a bit of a style into your own artwork is in the way that you do gestures. A lot of this information, even though doesn't necessarily end up exactly in the finished piece, as you clean it up, some of this information goes away as you work on top. But there's enough of it left behind that it informs a lot of, like I said, the style and how it works and how it will end up looking. Here's one of an elephant. Doesn't have to be just people. Gesture drawing is used for more than just figure drawing. Notice there's very little contours in this at all. There's a few places where there might be some, but most of the edges of this form are just made with scribbly, broken lines. And it's just been built up like a mass of scribbles. And those scribbles start to take shape. Here's some of somebody's dog. Multiple small drawings on one page. When you guys practice today, I want you to do this. I want you to do some smaller gestures on just one sheet of paper as a warm-up or as practice. It is a way of loosening up your hand too. Oftentimes people are a little bit, constipated when they're drawing. They move very slowly. They try to get all their lines perfect the first time. If you get in the habit of doing gestures as a form of stretch before the race, essentially, it loosens you up. It allows you to be a little bit more fluid, and you get a lot more life and movement into your work. Works really good for, when you're sketchbooking out in the real world. A lot of times you don't have a lot of time to record the information around you, especially if there's things like people, things that are moving. Here we have some people on a gondola moving underneath the Rialto Bridge. They're just, they're only there briefly, so you only have a few seconds sometimes to get that information down. So a gesture drawing works perfectly for this kind of situation. Sometimes figuring out your composition, gesturing is one of the smartest things that you can do because it allows you to sort of figure out your entire drawing in the first 3 to 5 minutes. Because of the way that you're working so rapidly and because you're not putting a lot of, really hard effort into creating the shapes, you can get an idea of whether your composition is going to look right. And once you're happy with how that composition is, then you can go back and work slow lines over the top. A lot of time comic books, if anybody's interested in that sort of artwork, the preliminary drawings are done in a very sketchy manner, very similar to this sort of thing. And then what happens is another artist comes, or that same artist, and uses a pen and then puts very clean, determined sort of contour lines over the top. And those two things work together. And then this layer is taken away, and all that you have left is the nice ink lines. However, gesture drawings in themselves are just, I find to be very beautiful because you see a lot of the artist's hand in there. You see a lot of their struggle, you see a lot of their determination, you see a lot of the movement and the speed in which they're working. A lot of things that talk about the artist themselves. Here's somebody just working at a computer, just a very rapid drawing, done in a matter of 3 to 5 minutes. So again, sorry, my face is covering this. Let me make it go away. So here we have sort of the anatomy of how gesture drawings inform finished drawings. So here with these feet, you see a very gestural sort of indication of the pose of that foot. It describes the volume, it describes the movement, it describes how it's posed, but there's not a lot of detail. And you see that in all three of these on the left. What's then superimposed on top of that is a more geometric type of drawing, a drawing where you take a very close indication of the planes and space and look at them geometrically. And that, in combination with what we learned last week with contours, here we have a very slow felt line that sort of works on top of that gesture. This is like the under armature, and this is like the finished piece. Here we have shading and also that really fine contour line that follows around. And that's how they work together. Same here. Here we have some people. You have the back of their heads. You really get a sense there's a lot of gesture here, just sort of feeling out the volumes of the back of the skull, the roundness of the back of the neck, the curve of the shoulders, all these loose, light lines that sort of build themselves up. And once that starts to take shape, that armature, you see very slow, chiseled in contour lines that are a lot more felt and a lot more, here on the ear, much more detailed. And finally, this is what's referred to as a mass drawing. It's a type of gesture, but it's where you use the side of your pencil. So before you even or have any temptation to make any contours, because that's one thing you want to avoid in gesture drawing, is you fill in the mass of the form, like paint it in with the side of your your drawing media. Like let's say if you're working in Vine charcoal, you would just break off a small piece, turn it on its side so that it's laying flat on the page, and you start scribbling in masses until you feel like you've created the bulk of the form or captured the volume. And once you've captured that mass, that volume, then you can start introducing some of these contours that respond to that mass. And the combination of those two things sort of work together. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and give you a bit of a demo here, and we'll talk about what the exercises are going to be for this week and what the long assignment will be.